Hello, booktube. It's been a while. I have been on a bit of a hiatus from booktube, but I could not let the end of the year go past without posting a best books of 2022 video. Sort of weirdly, I feel like a lot of my favorite books this year were fiction, and specifically genre fiction, which is a bit unusual for me. I read a lot of genre fiction, but it's sort of, I feel like in years past, it's been a constant stream of goodness in my reading and not like, oh, this is outrageously amazing or whatever. But this year I had a lot of really outstanding genre reads. So the way I'm gonna break down my best books is I'm gonna be talking about my 5 favorite fiction books, my 5 favorite nonfiction books, with some honorable mentions for rereads that I did and I really enjoyed. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start with fiction. I'm sort of annoyed because I actually have most of these books, so I could hold them up all fancy-like, but then I tend to lend out my favorite books because I'm like, you have to read this. In no particular order, my 5 favorite fiction books. Number 1, The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. This is a mystery series that's set in a retirement community in England. It is just very twee and amazing and character driven, and I loved it. If you're bothered by tweeness, this might be over the line for you. It really walked the line for me, so it really worked out well. Even though it's on my favorites list, I don't really remember the plot of this book so much. But the reason why I don't remember the plot so much is it's a lot more about the characters and their interactions with each other, and just like that really nice understated British humor. Hit the nail on the head. I really loved this book. I've gone on to read the other 2 in the series that have been published. Incredible. I feel like you've heard this all over booktube, but this is a great series if you like cozy mysteries. The next book is Broken Harbor by Tana French. Tana French is really one of my favorite mystery writers, and this book really hit the mark for me. It's sort of the polar opposite in terms of mood from the Thursday Murder Club series, in that Tana French's books are very dark and lyrical and get really into the psychology of really awful things that happen to people. This book features Scorcher, who is part of the murder squad, and he showed up in previous Tana French books because that's sort of how she links her mysteries together. But he catches this case where there's basically an entire family that has been murdered in this development, including their young kids. Trigger warnings if you don't like child deaths. It gets really dark, but there are obviously odd things going on in this house. Probably the most creepy is that like there are all these holes in the wall, and the parents have pointed baby monitors at the holes in the wall. So there's this bigger open question of like, what the heck was even going on here beyond who killed these people? Anyways, this is really an amazing book. I truly love Tana French in terms of, again, character development, the way her characters interact with each other. This book walks the line of melodrama really well, so if you're not really into dramatic mysteries, this one might not be the one for you, but I think that she does it very well, and I freaking love this author, and I don't know, I was just so into genre fiction this year. I read this book and one of Sally Rooney's books back to back, and I was like, why is Sally Rooney, like, I know Tana French is doing fine, like she's doing great, but why is Sally Rooney the literary darling? Like, I know it's genre fiction, but like I feel like Tana French does it better. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say. Next up we have Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. This is another series that I got super into this year. Basically, this is the story of a man named Tom Semlin, and he's on his honeymoon with his wife to the Tower of Babel, which is this great tower of industry and innovation and progress, whatever that means. So they decide to take their honeymoon there, and he immediately loses his wife and has to go find her. And that sounds like a very simplistic description of this book. If you've ever read this book or any of the other ones in the series, I would say it's sort of like a adult Alice in Wonderland vibe. He just like has a sort of imagination and creativity in his storytelling and in his world that you just like don't see very often in fantasy, in my opinion. I mean, like, I love the tropes, I truly do, but like this book was like innovative, I guess. Beyond just like the setting and like the totally new engaging world that you're in this series, you also get the characters who are very fleshed out in both their like attributes and flaws. They're all very believable and you get very attached to them. And I, again, just highly recommend this series. It was a real joy to read this year. The next book is the one book here that's not genre fiction, which is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I'm obviously very late to the Elena Ferrante game. I have been putting it off because I feel like people telling me I'm gonna love a book is like the #1 way for me to really be disappointed by a book. So I've been putting it off until some of the hype dissipates. And I haven't really heard about Elena Ferrante in like the last year or two in any meaningful way. So I decided finally to pick it up, and my guys, it's totally worth it. It's a really wonderful book. So this is the story of two friends, Elena and Lila, growing up in lower working class Naples. And as part of a series, I haven't read the rest of the series yet. This book basically covers their childhood and their teenage years, and I found it really interesting. Again, sort of a theme for me, but very character driven. The dynamics between the two are very believable. In a lot of books about female friendships, there's a lot of emphasis put on competition, and this book also has a lot of emphasis on competition, which I would normally find off-putting, but I feel like it's done in such a way that you understand it. It's not just like women tearing women down or whatever. So you've heard of this book, but I highly recommend it. It's definitely a favorite fiction from this year. I'm excited to continue with this series next year. Okay, and then the last spot I have as a tie, because I couldn't really decide between Book Lovers by Emily Henry, and it's the story of Nora and Charlie, who are both city people who end up going to North Carolina for, you know, plot reasons and, you know, doing the romance thing. But I think part of the reason why I really enjoyed this book is because it really took a lot of tropes and turned them around or explored them in interesting ways. You know, tropes are a part of genre fiction. They're like an integral part of why you go to a mystery book or a romance or fantasy, you know, whatever book you're going to. Tropes are part of the reason why you're there, right? Like, we expect them, we want them. She did a good job of like taking the tropes and having a really good time with them. And I think that anybody who is familiar with the genre of like romance novels or just like has watched Hallmark Channel movies, I think you'll go to this and really enjoy sort of how Emily Henry has like flipped a lot of the tropes around. So I realize that's not a very descriptive description, but that's why I really enjoyed this book. It is a romance novel, so if you're not into romance, don't read it. The other book that is like sort of tied for this spot is Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey, that's actually a writing team that writes these books. This is the first book in the Expanse series, and I thought it was a real page turner. I really liked all the characters. It's just like a very interesting setup overall. The series is 9 books long, so I'm on book like 5 or 6 right now. Part of the reason why I feel like I can't really firmly put this on my favorites list is that I feel like the sequels have been inconsistent, so I don't want to send people down a trail of like getting really deep into this series when I don't love the whole thing. Of course, it's very hard to be consistent across 9 books, but I will say that I really loved this first book. It has been worth it for me, which is saying a lot, again, because it's a long series. I am only on book 6, so I'll let you know how that goes. But anyways, sorry, I didn't do the summary for this one. So this book is basically about Jim Holden, who is the XO of a ice hauler, and this is sort of like a future where humans are all over the solar system, and they're like people who live out in the asteroid belt, and there's sort of like conflict in between the people who live out in the belt, called the Belters, and the people who live on Earth and on Mars. Holden gets mixed up in a bunch of shit, basically, and the plot's complicated. So maybe that's my whole summary. I'm really rusty. I'm really rusty with the summary game. This is amusing and also embarrassing. I did really like this book. If you're very into plotty sci-fi, I think this would be a great one to pick up. Okay, cool. It's time for the nonfiction. Part of the reason why I'm so shocked about this year in review is that I feel so strongly about my fiction, but like I have read some great nonfiction this year. All of it is from last spring. Like the last book that I read here was April and the other ones were in January and February. So I have been in a bit of a nonfiction drought recently. I mean, I've been reading nonfiction, but none of it's been like hitting the way that I would like it to. But anyways, this is about the highlights of the year. So even if they're from last January, let's do it. So the first nonfiction book I want to talk about is Cultish. This is a book about cults and language. So Amanda Montell starts out talking about the real culty cults like Jonestown, things like that, and how the language that these cults use could both draw people deeper into the cult and then also sort of eliminate their route of escape, basically. But then it goes on to talk about how language can be used to sort of create cult followings around like certain fitness studios, CrossFit, or like multi-layer marketing schemes and stuff like that, and how you can get drawn in by the same sort of language that is used in like a real cult setting. I feel like I'm not explaining this very well, but it was a very interesting book about linguistics and groupthink and things like that, and I very much recommend it. It's definitely got a 5 stars. One of the first books that I read in 2022. Next up, I read H is for Hawk by Helen MacDonald. This is a grief memoir, which is something that I don't normally trend towards. I read more than one grief memoir this year actually, but I know that this is one of Olive's favorite books and I trust Olive. So I read it and it was amazing. It was very good. Basically, H is for Hawk is about Helen MacDonald. After she lost her father, she ended up getting a goshawk to train. She had been involved in falconry growing up, and it's part memoir about like how she got interested in this sport, but it's also her relationship with the hawk and also like how hawks and falconry sort of relate back to our society, British society, things like that. She does like a very in-depth analysis of T.S. Eliot and his books on nature and specifically a goshawk. It's one of these books that's such a mishmash of like interesting information and like it really defies genre in a lot of way, which is like my favorite sort of nonfiction. I would say try this book. It surprised me how much I liked it. It's very good and I'm planning on rereading it. Memoir, a lot of the time I'll listen to an audiobook, but I think I want to reread this one physically. After that, I finished How to Write an Autobiographical Novel by Alexander Chee. This I'm not going to go into a lot because I've actually talked about this essay collection quite a lot on booktube. I've been reading it for like a year and a half. It's a really good essay collection. Basically, Alexander Chee is a writer who's known primarily for his novels, but he's written a lot of really great nonfiction for a lot of different outlets, and this is a collection of those essays that's been expanded out to like make it into more of a standalone collection, not just like random works. This is a lot about his experiences growing up gay, biracial in Maine. It also touches on his sexual abuse as a kid, so if that's triggering for you, that is talked about here. Just an FYI. But there are many essays in here that I found really profound and amazing. He's a wonderful writer. Yeah, I just truly loved this collection and I highly recommend it. And you've probably seen it on this channel before, but now I finally finished it last spring and I can definitively give it a 5 out of 5. So this book. Okay, the next book is Seek You by Kristen Radke. This is a book that I read again in like January or February last year, and it's a graphic bit of nonfiction and I really loved it. I wish I had the book here to talk about, but I did lend it to somebody who has not given it back to me, so I need to get it back. But anyways, Seek You is a sort of like graphic essay collection where Kristen Radke talks about a lot of different topics that surround the idea of American loneliness. So she talks about ham radio, she talks about like old Western movies, and like, who's the guy with the monkeys? She talks about these like psychological attachment experiments performed by Harry Harlow, which were devastating and like actually very hard to read about. But it's just one of these mishmash books that sort of defies categorization because it's coming at this topic from so many different angles. I found the art beautiful. I thought that the fact that it was a graphic bit of nonfiction really added to the stories. There was a section where Kristen Radke had interviewed a bunch of people about their loneliest moments, and just seeing like the line drawing of their face with that description, somehow it was just like much more affecting than, you know, if you'd just gotten that in text. I think it worked really well, and it's definitely in my top 5 nonfictions of 2020. Last but not least, another graphic bit of nonfiction, Persepolis. I'm again very late to this game. Persepolis is the memoir of a girl growing up in Iran during the Iranian Revolution, and sort of her experience being the daughter of politically active parents and sort of seeing the cultural crackdown in Iran through the eyes of a child. I thought it was really affecting that sort of contrast in between, like, as an adult reading this book, you know that there are like horrific things that are happening, and she touches on horrific things that are happening, but then she also is telling you about how like when she was 10, all she wanted was a Guns N' Roses poster, and like trying to get that poster was like her jam for like a month, you know what I mean? And I feel like that sort of contrast of the political background in contrast to her experience as just like a normal kid growing up was really affecting. And it goes, this is like the complete collection. So I definitely found the bits about her early childhood really interesting, but it also goes into her experience in like a boarding school in Germany and adolescence and being sort of not homeless, but away from home and culturally separated from her family through this experience of studying abroad, things like that. This book I thought was very good. Might be a good read right now, you know? Those are all the new to me books that I read in 2022 that I absolutely love, but I just wanted to do a little honorable mention for Spinning Silver and How to Do Nothing, because these 2 books I love very much, and I did reread them this year and they still hold up. So Spinning Silver is a fantasy novel from Naomi Novik, who's published a lot of other really great stuff, but it's sort of following the experience of 3 women in Russia, culturally Russian, Eastern European land, but also there's magic. It pulls a lot from Russian fairy tales and also Jewish folklore and a lot of different historical sources. The main character is Miriam, and she's a debt collector's daughter who takes over the family business and is going through the woods one day and boasting that she can turn silver into gold. And someone takes her up on that. That is just like a really good, I think this is only the 2nd time I've actually read it, but it might end up being like a yearly reread or something like that because I really enjoy it. I feel like it hits a lot of the marks that I want in a fantasy book. And then How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell is another book that I really love. I have honestly, I think I have reread this book almost every year since I've read it 3 or 4 times now at this point. And by read, I'm talking about, I listened to it on audiobook. I think the first time I read it physically, but now I just listen to it sort of when I need to be recentered, I guess. So I just highly recommend How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell. I feel like this is a book that has bad marketing in that you look at it and you expect one thing and you get something very different that I think is really wonderful and valuable, but if you're not expecting it, I think you could be like, what is this book? Anyways, so it's sort of like a bit of a, I would say, philosophical treatise on how to like be in the world and sort of like hold on to your selfhood and hold on to your attention when people are trying to commodify that, I guess. It's definitely like philosophical and talks about art history and like nature and things like that. It's not like self-help, which is sort of what it sounds like it's gonna be. So that's just a warning. But I do love this book. I just wanted to mention those two because I like talking about books that I love, and I love both of those books. And yeah, why not talk about them here again? Those are my books for 2022. It has been a really great reading year for me. I mean, I talked about nonfiction being a bit of a dud this year overall. I'm gonna do a stats video at some point. But if we're just talking about an overall numbers count, I have flown past the 100 books mark. I'm at like 107 right now, which is more than I've ever read in a year. My page count is definitely up, but again, that's also because I've been reading a lot more genre fiction, and like, I'm just going with what I'm enjoying. So that's why I've been enjoying this year. It's been great. I know I haven't been on here a lot, so sorry about that, but I've just been reading and vibing. You know what I mean? Anyways, thank you for tuning in. I look forward to seeing all of your best of 2022 books lists. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.